The autumn of 2024 witnessed a severe disruption to American commerce. A major port strike effectively paralyzed the U.S. East and Gulf coasts. The International Longshoremen's Association, known as the ILA, initiated this widespread industrial action. This union represents a formidable force of 45,000 dock workers. Their decision to strike brought critical shipping hubs to a standstill. The repercussions were felt almost immediately across the nation's supply chains. The strike officially commenced at 12:01 a.m. Eastern Time on the 1st of October 2024. This followed a period of intense but ultimately fruitless negotiations. The ILA was in talks with the United States Maritime Alliance, or USMX, which represents employers. The discussions centered on a new pay agreement and concerns over the increasing automation of port operations. These two sticking points proved insurmountable during the negotiation period. Unfortunately, the deadline passed without a resolution acceptable to both parties. The strike's impact on the United States logistics system was both immediate and profound. Thousands of shipping containers found themselves misrouted. Billions of dollars in traded goods were suddenly anchored on vessels, unable to reach their destinations. This created a ripple effect, disrupting businesses and supply lines far inland from the coastal ports. Ocean carriers had no choice but to divert numerous vessels. For example, the Hapag-Lloyd-operated vessel, Stat Dresden, was rerouted. It had been bound for the port of Savannah but was instead sent to the Mediterranean Sea. MSC, the world's largest container ship company, also took evasive action. Their vessels were diverted to alternative ports including Freeport in the Bahamas and Halifax in Canada. Consequently, significant port congestion became a visible sign of the crisis. Long queues of vessels formed off the coasts of major ports. Savannah, Norfolk, and New York all saw an increasing number of ships waiting idly offshore. In early October 2024, predictions suggested that the number of waiting vessels could exceed 100 by the end of that first strike week. Analysts had issued warnings in September 2024, foreseeing significant global service disruptions if a strike occurred. The economic fallout from the port strike was staggering. Initial estimates suggested the industrial action was costing the U.S. economy at least $500 million each day. Experts warned this figure had the potential to escalate dramatically. If the strike were to continue for several weeks, the daily cost could soar to an alarming $2 billion. Beyond the direct financial losses, the strike exerted considerable inflationary pressure. The delays and increased logistics costs were expected to translate into higher prices for consumers. This created an unwelcome economic headwind. Businesses, already grappling with various global uncertainties, faced yet another challenge to their operational stability and profitability. The strike's impact threatened to be widespread, touching many sectors of the American economy. There were historical precedents for such disruption. An 11-day lockout at West Coast ports back in 2002 provided a sobering comparison. That event was estimated to have cost the economy approximately $1 billion per day, using contemporary values. Moreover, it resulted in backlogs that took a painstaking 6 months to clear fully. The scale of the trade affected by the 2024 strike was immense. The 14 ILA-controlled ports, central to the dispute, had handled a colossal 28.4 million 20-foot equivalent units, or TEUs, in 2023 alone. The diversion of containers away from the striking ports led to a dramatic escalation in inland transportation costs. Shippers faced massively increased bills to move their goods. For instance, a container originally destined for the port of Savannah, if diverted to the port of Norfolk, saw its onward transportation cost jump. The price reportedly rose from an expected $300 to a startling $2,000. This pattern was repeated across various alternative routes. Overall, inland transportation costs became a significant financial burden. These costs could be up to 10 times higher than initially anticipated by businesses. The increase was driven by several factors. Additional mileage was a primary cause as goods traveled longer distances from alternative ports. The need for extra chassis, unplanned storage fees, and demurrage charges for delayed containers also contributed significantly to the inflated expenses. Importers and exporters dealing with refrigerated cargo, known as reefer containers, faced particular hardship. They were hit with additional charges for the electricity required to power these temperature-sensitive units whilst they awaited unloading. This was a critical issue for perishable goods. The financial strain was therefore not limited to the shipping lines or port operators. The retail sector was hit particularly hard by the port paralysis. Major household names like Walmart, Amazon, Home Depot, and Nike had vast quantities of goods stuck. These included popular consumer items such as toys, furniture, bedding, and electronics. These products, instead of reaching shop shelves or distribution centers, ended up in what amounted to floating storage aboard anchored container ships. The grocery supply chain also felt the tremors of the strike. Stu Leonard Jr., the chief executive of the Stu Leonard's grocery chain, provided some insight in October 2024. He indicated that whilst his stores were generally stocked to cover the Thanksgiving period of that year, there were concerns. Supplies of fresh produce and fish, which rely on rapid transit, could be significantly affected. This, he suggested, could potentially lead to higher prices for consumers seeking these items. Perhaps most critically, the healthcare industry faced severe challenges. The strike exacerbated existing vulnerabilities in the supply of key medicines and medical supplies. Shortages became a growing concern. This situation was made even more complex by the ongoing war in Israel, which had commenced in October 2023. The combined effect posed a risk to patient care. As early October 2024 progressed, there were no encouraging signs of a breakthrough in the dispute. The International Longshoremen's Association and the United States Maritime Alliance remained deeply entrenched in their positions. Reports indicated that the two sides were not actively returning to the negotiating table. This impasse prolonged the agony for businesses and the wider economy, with no clear end to the disruption in sight. The resolve of the union appeared particularly strong. ILA President Harold Daggett adopted a firm public stance. He made it clear that the union was prepared for a sustained fight to achieve its objectives on pay and job security. This unwavering position from the union leadership suggested that any quick or easy resolution was unlikely. The core issues of wages and automation were clearly deeply felt by the dock workers. Finding common ground on these critical points proved to be an exceptionally difficult task, leading to a protracted and damaging standoff. The then Biden administration was reportedly making efforts to bring the conflicting parties back to the negotiating table. However, these behind-the-scenes attempts, as of early October 2024, had not yielded a public breakthrough. The absence of a swift resolution suggested the complexities involved were significant. A key factor in the unfolding situation was the administration's pre-strike stance. It had been indicated in September 2024 that the government would not seek to enforce legislation to keep the port terminals operating. This approach differed from some historical instances where federal intervention had been used to end port disputes deemed critical to the national economy or security. The political climate of late 2024 undoubtedly influenced the government's handling of the strike. The decision not to immediately compel a return to work could have been seen as respecting the collective bargaining process. However, it also risked prolonging the economic damage caused by the idle ports along the East and Gulf coasts. Even as the strike persisted, the backlog of inbound vessels continued to swell. This created an ever larger mountain of cargo waiting to be processed. Furthermore, new shipments booked by businesses unaware of the strike's duration or hoping for a swift resolution were still en route. These were expected to arrive within 45 to 50 days from early October 2024, threatening to exacerbate port congestion significantly once operations eventually resumed. The task of clearing the existing backlog was daunting. Estimates from early October 2024 suggested it would take at least 3 weeks just to clear the vessels and containers that had already accumulated. This was based on the assumption that ports could operate at full capacity once reopened. Beyond the immediate backlog, longer-term capacity shortages were also forecast. Sea Intelligence, a respected maritime analytics firm, predicted export capacity shortages in Europe within 2 to 3 weeks of the strike's impact, and in Asia within 5 to 7 weeks. The Great Port Strike of October 2024 exposed critical vulnerabilities. It highlighted the need for greater resilience and contingency planning. Reports in November 2024 drew attention to the de minimis loophole in U.S. customs law. Millions of packages, mostly from China, entered the U.S. daily without proper inspection, Calls grew louder to close this loophole and demand greater transparency.